We're now going to explore the sons of God a little bit more, and then we're going to get into the giants, predominantly to lay the foundation through the work of Plato and the writings of other people that have investigated Atlantis, to prove conclusively that Atlantis is indeed the memory of the pre-flood civilization. This is not to say that Atlantis was not a continent of its own, but more to the point that the concept of Atlantis, the concept of a utopia, and the combination of gods and man to form or forge this utopia is prevalent in the occult and in the ancient writings. There are some programs that are beginning to show up on television, such as The Mysterious Origins of Man, which are now beginning to question the concept of evolution that has been taught by Darwin, and are beginning to suggest that possibly we were created. And what is really going on is the merger of the concepts of evolution and creation together. They're going to forge a link between evolution and creation, the ancient gods and all of the ancient mysteries, the pyramids, Stonehenge, the buildings and pyramids in Mexico and South America, the Nazca lines and all of these things, along with the face on Mars and Cydonia and the other mysteries that are prevalent today by people who are trying to search out the truth. What is happening is the forging of a synthesis that will make all these mysteries converge into an ultimate reality. God calls it a strong delusion designed to fool the human race into accepting an absolute lie because they rejected the message Jesus Christ brought, and they rejected his salvation and his commandments to obtain that salvation. So with this synthesis coming, we're going to see more and more, we believe, here at CIA, TV programs designed to this end, that they're uncovering all these mysteries and they're coming up with scientific, they will say, explanations, some of which will seem unfathomable to the masses of people, until the sons of God literally show up again as Jesus Christ said they would, and as we believe already have, and that is why we're having so much UFO activity on planet Earth at the present time. You have to remember that Jesus Christ said that as it was during the days of Noah, so would it be again. Well, it just so happens that Noah lived during the days of the sons of God. He came through the flood and actually lived another 350 years on this side of the flood. The memory of the sons of God would not only pass through Noah and his sons to the other side of the flood, but would also be brought forward by the giants themselves, because the Bible says very explicitly that the giants were in the earth during the days of before the flood, and also it says after that. We believe therefore that Goliath and King Og and some of the other characters mentioned in the scriptures were the remnants of the giants that made it through the flood. There are times when the Bible uses the word all, the destruction of all flesh, in the sense that it means effectively all. In other words, it destroyed the overall civilization or target that God had in mind. He could equally say, well, I am going to destroy all of the United States. Well, if he destroyed most of the major cities, he would have effectively destroyed all of the United States, because the United States could no longer function if that were the case. And so we have to understand that ancient legend claims as well that some of the giants and some people actually went underground and came up after the floods subsided. We don't know if any of this is true or not. It doesn't really matter from that viewpoint, because what does matter is the occult memory of the sons of God and the golden age of the gods, or we could say the pre-flood civilization, which we believe, and we believe can prove, is the basis and the foundation of Atlantis. Plato is very, very explicit that Atlantis was run by semi-divine beings. They were half God, half human. The only time and the only record we have of that in the scripture is a pre-flood civilization after mankind began to multiply upon the face of the earth. Now, in this video story that was presented on TV, The Mysterious Origins of Man, they suggest that a lot of these cities and monuments were laid out on the basis of astronomical measurement, and therefore by running the astronomical signs backwards through computers that they can date these monuments and date these cities. This is more and more becoming a common practice with the Sphinx, with the pyramids, and some of the other monuments and cities that have been discovered. The only problem with this is that sort of dating relies upon a steady state planet Earth that revolves at a certain time, goes through the equinoxes at a certain time, and the flow of the heavens is steady state. If, in fact, you had a polar shift in which the surface of the Earth changed, and therefore the continents changed, and the remaining monuments survived due to their location during this shift, you would throw off by thousands of years your dating concept as to when these things were actually built. We believe this is also part of that strong delusion that God is sending down to planet Earth because of man's rejection of his Son, and that everything will check out according to man. All of the factual data, all of the scientific data will in fact check out and will prove to man that the Bible is a pack of lies. In other words, God is saying, all right, if you don't believe it, I'm going to prove to you that it is a pack of lies, and thereby he damns everyone who embraces that concept. And the warning is in the scripture. He says that's exactly what he is going to do, and we believe he is in the process of doing it. Well, without further ado, let's get back into the sons of God, lay the foundation, and then bring it up to the esoteric, because the New Age movement and the Masonic Lodge and the Illuminati are deeply involved, whether they realize it or not, in the concepts of Atlantis, of the golden age, of a utopia, which is one of the reasons we believe they are trying desperately to forge a new Atlantis out of the United States and to create another one-world system with 10 kings and one supreme deity. It's very, very interesting how all this ties together. We hope you enjoy the rest of this video. Thank you. But you, from the beginning, were made spiritual, living a life which is eternal and not subject to death. All the generations of the world. These fallen beings that came to earth were made spiritual, and they lived a life that was eternal. If the sons of God were not subject to death, then mankind would view these gods as having eternal life. And in all the ancient writings, that's exactly what we find, that they attributed to these gods eternal life. A lot of books have been written about this, Forgotten Worlds. We are not the first. And these books are uncovering the secret of Genesis chapter 6. Gods there in darkness. Only problem is they're not gods. They're not extraterrestrial beings. They're only posing as extraterrestrial beings, the gods of Eden. They're on the demonic side. They're Satan's henchmen. There's just loads of books out on the market. The newest evidence of extraterrestrial contact in ancient Egypt. Divine encounters, the guide to visions, angels. The world before Ruth Montgomery. She's a leading New Ager, and she writes specifically about Atlantis, super scientists of ancient Atlantis and other unknown worlds, McBride, Cherry Stagger, and Chariots of the Gods is another one. In fact, Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Däniken started the whole thing. The religious legends of the pre-Inca peoples say that the stars were inhabited and that the gods came down to them from the constellation of the Pleiades. Sumerian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Egyptian inscriptions constantly present the same picture. Gods came from the stars and went back to them. They traveled through the heavens in fire ships or boats, possessed terrifying weapons, and promised immortality to individual men. There is no question that these people came down and presented themselves as extraterrestrial, because the mythology of the Eskimos also says that the first tribes were brought to the north by gods with brazen wings. The oldest American Indian sagas mention a thunderbird who produced fire and fruit to them. The Mayan legend, the Papa Vu, tells us that the gods were able to recognize everything, the universe, the four cardinal points of the compass, and even the round shape of the earth. And he asked some very interesting questions. What are the Eskimos doing talking about metal birds? Why do the Indians mention this? The Egyptian pantheon is just as confusing. The ancient text of the people of the Nile also tells of a mighty beings who traversed the firmament in boats. The text to the sun god Ra runs, thou couplest under the stars and the moon, thou drawest the ship of a ten. In heaven and on earth, like the timelessly revolving stars, and the stars at the North Pole that do not set. Here is an inscription from a pyramid. Thou art he who directs the sunship of millions of years. So who is this Ra? Is this an ancient memory? When the gods came down to give the king the model, he appeared in a gleaming heavenly chariot and afterwards disappeared over the horizon in it. Today's representations of the winged sun and a soaring falcon carry the sign of eternity and eternal life, and they can still be found on doors and temples. And of course, ancient Egyptian the pyramids that they've recently uncovered, all the inscriptions tell of this very thing. So what is it that mankind is remembering? It has to do, we believe, with the sons of God, the Orion mystery, unlocking the secrets of the pyramids. But you, from the beginning, says Enoch, were made spiritual, living a life which is eternal, and not subject to death in all the generations of the world. Mankind was made subject to death. Therefore, he says, God says to them, therefore I made you not wives for you, because being spiritual, your dwelling is in heaven. Then, referencing to the giants, now the giants who have been born of spirit and of flesh, the hybrids, shall be called upon earth evil spirits, and on earth shall be their habitation. Evil spirits shall proceed from their flesh, because they were created from above. These are the offsprings of the sons of God and the women, called the Nephilim, the fallen ones. From the holy watchers was their beginning and primary foundation. Now, the Bible mentions the holy watchers. Daniel speaks about that extensively. Evil spirits shall they be upon earth, and the spirits of the wicked shall they be called. The habitation of the spirits of heaven shall be in heaven. But upon earth shall be the habitation of terrestrial spirits who are born in earth. And this is where, according to the book of Enoch, the demons and demonology come from. The spirits of the giants shall be like clouds, which shall oppress, corrupt, fall, contend, and bruise upon earth. That's demonic oppression, and that's demonic possession. And they shall enter in or gather around people and oppress them and cause great trouble. They shall cause lamentation. No food shall they eat, and they shall be thirsty. They shall be concealed, or they're invisible. Can't see them. God says these spirit beings are invisible, but they're going to do this to mankind. And these spirits shall rise up against these demons, the sons of men, and against women, and they shall come forth from them during the days of slaughter and destruction in the last days. In other words, the demonic activity of the last days is incredible. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So we have a progression here. We have the sons of God, then we have the fallen giants, the mighty men, which were of old, which the Greeks called Titans, and they were men of renown. Now, the word mighty means powerful, tyrants, giant men, mighty men, strong and valiant men. They were extremely powerful because they were a combination, evidently, of man and God, and this is exactly what Greek legend talks about. To be strong, to prevail are the roots, to act insolently, to exceed in strength, to be great, to be mighty, to prevail, to be stronger than anyone else. And that comes from the root, to be a valiant man or a warrior. Okay? Now the word old is very interesting because it comes from the word concealed, or the vanishing point, out of mind, or in regards to actual time, it means ancient time, continuous time, or eternal. These were men from the eternal, which further verifies these were angelic beings, and are half angelic and half man, and they came from the eternal gods. Now the word renown means position, a mark or memorial individuality, honor, authority, character, men of renown, men of report. And they began to be very evil as time went on. And if you look up the word Titan, which the Greeks used in mythology, you find that all of these people are offspring of the gods, the Titans. So it's very, very interesting that all of this fits together, doesn't it, with exactly what Genesis 6 says, that the angels of God, the fallen angels, came down to men, saw the daughters of men, took women, all of whom they chose, and produced a race of Titans. So Greek mythology is not as far wrong as you might think. And if you go into the legend of Atlantis, you find out who ran it. The tale, which was of great length, says Plato, began as follows. I have before remarked in the speaking of the allotments of the gods that they distributed the whole earth into portions, differing in extent, and made themselves temples and sacrifices. And Poseidon, receiving for his lot the island of Atlantis, begat children by a mortal woman, and settled them in a part of the island which I will proceed to describe. Now look at what the gods did. They came down and they divided the whole earth. He also begat and brought up 5 pairs of male children, dividing the island of Atlantis into 10 portions. He gave to the firstborn of the eldest pair his mother's dwelling and the surrounding allotment, which was the largest and the best, and made him king over the rest. And that was Atlas. The others he made princes, and gave them rule over many men in a large territory, and he named them all. And the eldest, who was king, he named Atlas, and from him the whole island and the ocean received the name of Atlantic. Well, this is exactly what Genesis 6 says. The gods arrive on planet Earth. The gods divide the earth into regions, and they're doing it again. They've divided the earth into 10 bioregions. Poseidon was granted Atlantis, and that's the equivalent of America. And he divides America into 10 portions, or Atlantis. And the United States government has divided America into 10 portions under FEMA. And we're carrying out this plan exactly as to ancient Atlantis. And he married a mortal woman, Atlas did, and had 5 male sets of twins, and the eldest was Atlas. And then they divided Atlas into 10 regions, each ruled over by a king, with Atlas as the chief king. Now under FEMA, the United States of America, is divided up into 10 regions, with the president as the chief king. And there are 7 islands in the Atlantis group. Now you go into Josephus, and he says that the line of Seth were the inventors of that peculiar sort of wisdom which is concerned with the heavenly bodies and their order, and their inventions might not be lost before they were sufficiently known. Upon Adam's prediction that the world was to be destroyed at one time by the force of fire, and at another time by the violence and quantity of water, they made 2 pillars, one of brick, the other of stone. They inscribed their discoveries on them both, that in case the pillar of brick should be destroyed by the flood, the pillar of stone might remain, and exhibit those discoveries to mankind, and also inform them that there was another pillar of brick erected by them. Now this remains in the land of Syriad, which is Egypt, to this day. So according to the book of Josephus, the line of Seth, who was developing and growing at the same time the giants were here, built 2 pillars, one of brick, one of stone. Is the Great Pyramid, or several of the pyramids, were they built by the line of Seth to show us what they had discovered and learned, not only about the scriptures and about the redemption of man, but also astronomical data. Now who built the rest of it? It seems as though Plato says that the giants built huge statues and temples for themselves and for their sacrifices. Are these the memories that mankind is talking about? Is this what we have dug up in Mexico and in South America? Are these the great mounds of England long ago? Is much of this pre-flood? Is it all pre-flood? We believe it is. We believe the evidence suggests these buildings were advanced technology. They were huge. They all have huge rocks. Giants 15 to 30 feet tall could easily build something like this if they had the technology to do it. We're not saying that all of them were, but the ancient writings do say that there were a race of giants, extremely huge, that did rule over mankind. It was a very strange situation in the antediluvian age.
I fly up from you, O men. I am not for the earth. I am for the sky. I have soared to the sky as a heron. I have kissed the sky as a falcon. I am the essence of a god, the son of a god, the messenger of a god. Behold, the faithful and loving Osiris has come, as the stars of Orion, the beautiful one. I have come that I may glorify Orion. My soul is a star of gold, and with him I will traverse the sky forever.
This strange and beautiful poetry comes from hieroglyphs carved by the ancient Egyptians on sarcophagi and on the walls of tombs. These pyramid texts, as they are called, are some of the earliest religious writings known to man. Although they were deciphered over 150 years ago, today they're being re-examined in the light of new theories about the ancient Egyptians' perception of their world and their man-made mountains. These texts also show this shape known as an Ankh, which symbolized the life force, and their reverence for the great god Atum. And these writings talk repeatedly of the pharaoh becoming a star and traveling to the constellations.
This hieroglyph symbolizes Sobed, which is their name for Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, which they associated with the goddess Isis.
And here is the name of the king Unas in the oval-shaped cartouche. And here we are told he is given life and he is the beloved of the supreme god, his father, Atum.
Clearly we are looking at a situation where an idea sparked in the mind of some great architect priest. There must have been a very powerful motive behind this idea. You don't start a construction plan raising monuments to heights of 100 meters without being very motivated.
Traveling out from both chambers are four small 8-inch square shafts, a north shaft from the king's chamber and a southern shaft. These both extend through to the outer casing of the pyramid, a northern shaft from the queen's chamber, which does not reach to the outer casing and was also closed at its inner end, and finally a southern shaft, again closed at both ends. The angle of the southern shaft of the king's chamber is 45 degrees. As their calculations reached back to the time of the building of the Great Pyramid, they were in for quite a surprise. The shaft lined up perfectly with Orion's belt.
We have seen how this shaft of the king's chamber points directly to the belt of Orion. By the way, Trimble took it up to there in 1964. The next step was to ask, therefore, where do the shafts in the queen's chamber point? So I did the calculations, and I was amazed to discover that the southern shaft of the queen's chamber pointed to Sirius, his consort, Isis. It was fantastic revelation.
Phenomenal as it is, the theory of correlation between the pyramids and Orion's belt was only the beginning. To understand its significance, Bauval looked for a wider plan. He started with Egypt's most obvious feature, the Nile. He looked at where the pyramids were in relationship to the Nile and the angle they made with it, and compared them with the position of Orion's belt in relation to the Milky Way. It then occurred to Bauval to look at the other two existing pyramids of the 4th dynasty, which were built for unknown reasons some miles away from Giza. Bauval discovered from original graffiti that the first one at Abu Rawash, built by Jadafra, a son of Khufu, was also named after a star. The second one was built 3 miles from Giza at Zawiyat al-Aryan. He then looked at the overall pattern and was staggered. Osiris was the constellation of Orion. Therefore, Osiris on Earth was the pyramids of the Giza area. The Egyptians were attempting to build no less than heaven on Earth. It seems that not only were these pyramids of Giza a representation of the heavenly kingdom above, but they were also the ancient Egyptians' version of a sort of Cape Canaveral, with the ability to propel the soul of a pharaoh to distant destinations in the sky. To understand why, we need to go back to the pyramid texts and the Book of the Dead. New translations of the pyramid text tell us much about how the pharaohs regarded themselves. They saw themselves as part of a direct line going back to Osiris, the first god king who founded Egypt. They were his embodiment. They were god kings, and each pharaoh attempted to reenact the life and death of Osiris.
The astronomer engineer Robert Bovall, using the computer model of the Giza Plateau, made a startling discovery which seems to confirm this ancient age of the Sphinx.
In very simple terms, the first thing that one realizes when you look at the pyramids of Giza is that they're designed along astronomical principles. We're finding that the astronomy is leading us to conclude that the Sphinx was erected in 10,500 BC. And this matches exactly with the ideas that have been developed in the geological analysis of the Sphinx. So there are 2 hard sciences now indicating that the Sphinx could be very, very old, and going back to the 11th millennium BC.
According to Graham Hancock, if Tiahuanaco and the Sphinx were both built around 12,000 years ago, they may have had a common source. Consider these similarities between the Americas and Egypt. Both have huge pyramids, precisely aligned to the cardinal points. Temples with megalithic stones, with extremely fine joints of less than a 50th of an inch. Both Egypt and the Americas used royal headdresses of similar style. Both employed a unique style of construction using L-shaped corners. Both used the same style of metal clamps to hold huge stones in place, and both cultures used the process of mummification to preserve and honor their dead. These compelling similarities between Egypt and the Americas suggest to some that a sophisticated group of seafaring people crossed the Atlantic thousands of years before Columbus. A collection of ancient maps to be Jericho in the Old World, dated to around 8,000 BC. Yet in South America, the so-called New World, scientists are looking at evidence of a city that could be twice as old. Situated at an altitude of 12,500 feet, Tiahuanaco is one of the most mysterious cities in the world. Traditionally, it's thought to have been built by the predecessors of the Incas, 2,000 years ago. However, around the turn of the century, Bolivian scholar Arthur Poznansky began a 50-year study of the ruins of Tiahuanaco. Using the science of astronomy, Poznansky came to an amazing conclusion. He calculated that Tiahuanaco had been constructed more than 17,000 years ago, long before any civilization was supposed to have existed. Poznansky called this fabulous city the cradle of civilization. Even though the accuracy of Poznansky's measurements were confirmed by engineers, his conclusions about the age of Tiahuanaco have never been accepted. The Great Sphinx of Egypt, keeper of the ancient mysteries, guardian of the ancient secrets. The
Sphinx is considered to be the greatest statue on Earth.
Good evening. I'm Charlton Heston. Every 100 years or so, an idea comes along that can shake the world. An idea so revolutionary that at first no one believes it could be true. When Galileo showed evidence that the Earth moved around the sun, the authorities arrested him. Many people refused to believe that the Wright brothers could fly even after they'd been doing it for 2 years. But eventually, if the evidence is convincing, a theory can be accepted as common knowledge. What you're about to see could be history in the making. Tonight, we go to Egypt to examine the controversial theories of John Anthony West. West and his team of scientists challenge our long-held views about the origins of the Great Sphinx. They suggest that the Sphinx was carved before Egypt became a desert, 9,000 to 10,000 years ago. It's remarkable that for thousands of years, the evidence has been in plain sight, yet till now, no one has recognized its significance. If West's theories prove to be correct, the implications are staggering. We've been taught that the people who inhabited Egypt during that early period were primitives who survived by hunting and scavenging for food. John West believes that this view is incomplete. He feels that an entire chapter of man's early history is missing. West's team has uncovered new evidence which suggests that we're descendants of an unknown earlier civilization, an advanced culture capable of incredible technological feats. Tonight we'll examine this evidence to see if man's early history needs to be rewritten. Could the legends of Atlantis be true? To a geologist, erosion tells the story of a rock's history. The limestone bedrock in Giza is like a layer cake composed of both hard and soft layers. The wind-driven sand scours out the softer layers, leaving the harder layers intact. An example of this is found here in the tomb of Deben, which is carved out of the exact same rock as the Sphinx. Once a smooth wall, it's been exposed to desert conditions for over 4,000 years. On the other hand, rain weathering has an entirely different look. Rocks which have been weathered by rain have a round, undulating profile. This is very different in appearance from the hard, sharp profile caused by wind weathering.
This is a classic textbook example of what happens to a limestone wall when you have rains beating down on it for thousands of years.
It's only found in one area on the Giza Plateau, here, on the Sphinx and on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure. These man-made vertical walls were carved from the same layer of bedrock, a mere 300 yards apart. According to Egyptologists, they were carved at the same time. But if that's so, shouldn't they exhibit the same pattern of erosion? Schock was certain that the walls of the Sphinx enclosure were eroded by water cascading down off the Giza Plateau. Water whose only possible source was rain. This was the key element in Schock's argument. But when did it rain?
Part 3, the esoteric connection from gods to Masons. Book of Enoch says, "Say, in heaven have you been? Secret things, however, have not been manifested to you, yet have you known a reprobated mystery. This you have related to women in the hardness of your heart, and by that mystery, by the occult powers, have women and mankind multiplied evils upon the earth." In other words, what Satan did is take some of the powers of heaven, twist them around into evil. The word mystery means hidden or secret knowledge, knowledge not known to mankind because of his nature. In the dictionary, the term illuminate means to enlighten. Number 4, as with knowledge. Illuminati, persons possessing or claiming to possess superior enlightenment. A name given to different religious societies or sects because of their claim to enlightenment. This illuminating or superior enlightenment is, of course, tapping into this hidden or secret and actually forbidden wisdom. "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend unto heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north." Now the word Lucifer actually means the morning star, or Lucifer in the sense of brightness. It comes from the root to shine, to be clear, to make a show, to boast. Essentially it means to be bright, to make clear, to shine, to have great knowledge. "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" This is in Isaiah chapter 14, and it's speaking in reference to the king of Babylon, the leader of the end-time final apostasy. "Thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, How has the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased." He is the king of Babylon. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. We're going to find out that light in the occult is wisdom or knowledge, the revelation of hidden or forbidden knowledge. The word light means to shine or to make manifest by rays, luminous. And it comes from the word luminary, or brilliancy, of light, light-bearing, the morning star, or the day star. All references to Lucifer and his bringing to mankind hidden wisdom. "I, Jesus, have sent mine angels to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star." So Jesus in Revelation takes the title of the bright and the morning star. That's chapter 22 of Revelation. Satan, bright and morning star, that's the name he takes in Isaiah chapter 14, whereas Christ is revealed as the bright and morning star in Revelation chapter 22. So what we have then is Satan attempting to replace Jesus Christ with a counter-theology. Satan means one thing by light, Christ means another. And Satan therefore poses as the Christ to mankind, which is why he is held in such high estate or in high esteem. The light of Christ is agape love. The light of Satan is hidden knowledge and hidden powers, being able to tap into the dark side of the universe. Light in Scripture is usually a code word for agape love, but to the occult, light is a code word for knowledge and hidden wisdom. And so you have this war between true divine love and the quest for hidden knowledge with its resultant occultic powers, which the sons of God came down and showed man in the first part of his history on earth. During the flood, brought through his family, and his three sons were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham begot Cush, who in turn begot Nimrod. And Nimrod establishes Babylon. Nimrod was a very evil person. Nimrod's Babylon was called Babylonia, and that's the nation. Within this nation of Babylonia, Nimrod built the city, which he called Babylon, and then by the city he built the Tower of Babel, which is a symbol of total defiance and rebellion against God. And Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. In the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Nimrod forged quite a nation, and it was called Babylonia. Chapter 11, Genesis, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So Nimrod wanted to establish a centralized government. Now in Genesis chapter 9, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. The command of God was to go forth, fill the earth, and replenish it. And you be fruitful, multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. In other words, the order of God was to go forth into all the lands and fill up the whole land. Noah was told to go out into the whole earth and refill it, and Nimrod refused and wanted everyone to stay in a central location, and Nimrod wanted to build a strong government. Nimrod established the first world government with one language, one currency, and one religion. And after he had formulated his power, then he would go forth. According to Josephus, Nimrod set up a dictatorial welfare state and made everyone dependent upon him, and that is why Freemasonry wants a welfare state today. Now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as it was through his means that they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured their happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence upon his power. He also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, and that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. Nimrod was full of hatred for God because of the destruction of the antediluvian civilization. The Tower of Babel represents the first attempt to set up a world government that made everyone dependent upon it for their survival. It's what we would call the total welfare state, and of course that is what the Illuminati and communist plans really are. That's what they plan to do. They want to recreate it. Nimrod was the supreme ruler and the world dictator, and the Tower of Babel represents this one world socialistic government. And that's exactly what it was. It was a dictatorial socialistic form of government. And out of Nimrod's Babylon came two religions, the Madonna child complex, and two, the esoteric mysteries, which is in reality nothing more than Lucifer worship or the worship of the sun god. And it's the worship of the light bearer, and light, of course, means knowledge, of hidden mysteries. And so you see, the worship of Lucifer actually goes back to the pre-flood antediluvian civilization, and it tries to tap into the knowledge of that so-called golden age when the gods came down to earth and set up home here and taught mankind all this forbidden knowledge. To find the light is to unlock the powers of the spirit world, and that's the kingdom of Satan. When God saw that they acted so madly, he did not resolve to destroy them utterly, since they were not grown wiser by the destruction of the former sinners. In other words, Nimrod and his group never learned anything from what had happened, but he caused a tumult among them by producing in them various languages, and causing that, through the multitude of these languages, they should not be able to understand one another. The place wherein they built the tower is now called Babylon, because of the confusion of that language, which they readily understood before, for the Hebrew means by the word Babel, confusion. The Sibyl, which is an occultic prophetic group, also makes mention of this tower. When all men were of one language, some of them built a high tower, and so it's in all of the occult literature. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and the Lord did scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So we start at Babylon, and mankind scattered to all the nations of the world, east, west, north, south, and of course he took with him all of the religious concepts, the Madonna child cult and the esoteric mysteries. So Babylonian mystery religions go to the four corners of the world. And unto Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. So God waits until everybody is scattered. They've taken the esoteric mysteries, and then he divides the earth. Now the name of Peleg, 6389, means earthquake. But the actual word means also to divide, to split apart, to be divided. It also means a small channel of water. It's very interesting that the primary meaning of this thing is to split apart, earthquake. So, during the days of Peleg, was the earth divided into the present continents that we have today? And because of that very thing, when the race of man were scattered just after the confusion of the languages, God waited until they had come to their proper locations, and then through the division of the earth, through a gigantic earthquake, which, by the way, if you go back into the legends and the writings of antiquity, you will find mention of a gigantic earthquake. They even speak of huge tsunamis, huge waves rolling in. There is a myth or a legend, if you will, that waves about a half a mile high came in over the continent of America if you go into ancient Indian legends. In any event, the mystery of the Madonna child cult and the esoteric mysteries went to every nation upon earth. And we find remnants of those beliefs and that belief structure everywhere we go on every continent on earth. There's got to be a reason for that. And again, we say that the Bible does not lie. The Bible is telling the truth if people would just simply view it in that perspective. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Two words there, mystery and mother. Mother means the root. So on this side of the flood, what God is talking about here is our knowledge on this side of the flood, after the antediluvian age, we have a root, and that root is Babylon, and God tells us exactly what it is. He says, mystery. And with that one word, you can unlock the mystery of the whole thing, because mystery means silence imposed by initiation into religious rites, or a mystery, to shut the mouth, a secret or a mystery, to keep silent. Today, all the secret societies, from Freemasonry on down, the Rosicrucians, the rest of them, are all involved in the concept to shut the mouth, a secret or a mystery, silence imposed by initiation into religious rites. All mystery religions have secret rites for initiation performed in dark places. They take oaths of secrecy. And very, very interesting how this works, because they do not reveal the real truth of what they are teaching. And the reason they don't do that is because they want to get people in very slowly and get them in deeper and deeper until they finally cannot extricate themselves. The mother of all secret societies is Nimrod's Babylon. That's where he began it. He forged a one-world order which combined the mysteries with government and formed a priesthood of wise men to rule. And he got all this from the ancient Atlanteans, the antediluvian civilization. The concept of bringing together the political, economic, and religious powers into one powerful entity began with Nimrod's Babylon, and that's why it is actually a concept of dictatorial socialism, because the high priests of Babylon, or the Council of Wise Men, which even now they're beginning to talk about at the UN, ran all of the affairs of the kingdom. And there's a reason why we're going back to that. They had absolute authority over all subjects, lands, property, taxes, and finances, and Nimrod was the king. And we are rapidly going back to what some people would call the age of the Caesars, but actually it goes back to the Atlanteans. Satan established his throne in Babylon, where it remained even after the scattering of all the people. Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, "The secret which the king has demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers show unto the king?" Daniel's mocking, saying, "What about all your wise men, All the ones who have the secret knowledge and the hidden wisdom, why can't they tell you about it? So the court of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon was comprised of these people versed in the mysteries which came from Nimrod. His Nimrod establishes Mystery Babylon in its two branches, the Madonna Child cult and the Esoteric Mysteries. The Esoteric Mysteries and the Madonna Child cult, of course, when the world was scattered, went all around the world, but their central headquarters nonetheless remain in Babylon. Then we come down to Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon number 2, and he had within his court, of course, all the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers, all the people within the mystery hidden religions. Now, you have to remember that under Nebuchadnezzar, Israel, of the Old Testament Israel, was taken captive and taken to Babylon. Now, from Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, when the Jews returned back to Jerusalem, they came back with a totally rewritten Old Testament, interpreted through the eyes of the mystery religions, hence the Babylonian Talmud and the introduction of the Kabbalah. Now Satan moves his seat from Babylon to Jerusalem in preparation to try and stop Jesus Christ. And as you will recall, Jesus Christ ran into Satan personally outside of Jerusalem, and they had their confrontation, and of course Satan worked night and day to hinder the ministry of Jesus Christ. So it is from Nebuchadnezzar that we actually merge together the mysteries and the Old Testament Bible, which brings in the Jewish mystics and the Babylonian Talmud and the Kabbalah, which is, by the way, one of the most important books in Jewry or Zionism today. We still have many Orthodox Jews who go back to the Old Testament. But the Babylonian Talmud is not the Old Testament at all. It is a branch, the Jewish branch, of the esoteric mysteries. Now in Jerusalem, spiritually called Sodom and Egypt in the Bible, we have the Old Testament apostasy caused by the Israel going into captivity in Babylon and mixing in the esoteric mysteries with the Old Testament, from which comes the Babylonian Talmud, Zionism, and that branch of mystery. Then we have what we could almost call the New Testament apostasy, even though it hasn't actually been written at that point, it will be shortly, were the Gnostics. And the Gnostics were deep into the mysteries. In fact, they were, Luciferian worshipers. Out of this comes Romanism, which is nothing more than the very ancient Madonna Child cult of the Queen of Babylon. And we're going to show you that next, because this is a very important part of the apostasy of the New Testament and the setting up of mystery in both New Testament and Old Testament, which later on down the road merges, as we will show you. Okay, now Satan, first of all, goes to Jerusalem in an attempt to eliminate Christ, the threat of Jesus Christ. Then he goes to Pergamos in an attempt to stifle the advancement of the church. Pergamos was the front line of the Western movement of the church. When that failed, he went to Rome, and this is where he mixed together the ancient Babylonian Madonna Child and also incorporated some of the esoteric parts into Roman Catholicism, or Romanism, if you will. Then the next place he goes to is London. And we're going to show you how this works. It works through the secret hidden societies. Then he took up a seat in Germany to play a major role in Hitler's operation to exterminate the Jews. And finally, he ends up in the United States of America, both in Washington, D.C., and at the United Nations in New York City, which is Babylon the Great of modern times, and which is the home of Lucifer, according to the Bible, and we can prove it from the pages of Scripture. We don't have time in the Atlantis Chronicles to prove that America is Babylon. We have a 2-hour tape series, 6 full hours, showing you the American-Babylon connection and why and how America actually becomes the creator and initiator of the Antichrist. We're sort of a Judas. We turn upon our heritage, and we, in fact, introduce the world to Lucifer. And the secret societies set up America for that very purpose. It's in their writings, and we're going to show you that in that tape series. We can only briefly touch it now. Again, the devil taketh him up into an exceedingly high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them, and saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. So Jesus has, or rather Satan has, control over the kingdoms of the earth, and all Jesus had to do to get him was to fall down and worship Satan. And of course, you know that Jesus refused to do it, preferring to go to the cross and collect his kingdom in approximately 2,000 years later. And to the angel of the church in Pergamos write, These things saith he which has the sharp sword with 2 edges, I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. So Christ himself, in his letters to the church of Pergamos, says that's where Satan's seat is. And in our book, Babylon is Rising, when Cyrus took Babylon in 539 B.C., the high priests of the Babylonian mysteries moved to Pergamos, where they set up a college and a headquarters for the mysteries. It is interesting to note that Jesus Christ called Pergamos the headquarters for Satan. And he goes from Pergamos, Satan travels over to Jerusalem to try and stop Jesus from doing his ministry. Attalus was the supreme pontiff at Pergamos, and when he died in 133 B.C., he bequeathed the official titles and power of the Babylonian priesthood to the Caesars of Rome. Over time, a college of the Babylonian mysteries was set up in Rome at Mount Carmel, and this college educated the elect in the mystery religions and the occult. Julius Caesar was a supreme pontiff, or a pontifex maximus, in the order of the Babylonian priesthood, and this order was maintained by his successors until 376 A.D., when Emperor Gratian refused it because he was a Christian. And it was at that time transferred to the bishop and the Christian church at Rome. And that title is now assumed by the Pope. You can trace everything back from the Pope to ancient Babylon. Here's ancient Babylonian. Pontifex Maximus, the title, yes, Rome has that. High priest, yes, they are called cardinals. The priesthood, yes. Temple virgins, today we call them nuns. The world, it's a works religion, and Roman Catholic religion is definitely a works religion. It's a ritual religion. Confessionals, yes, they did that then. They do it now. All Catholics go to confession. Mass, they had Mass back then. Now Catholics have Mass. Wafer God, transubstantiation, yes, it's called the Eucharist today. Prayer beads in ancient Babylon are now called the Rosary. Prayers for the dead, and yes, they're still doing that. Incantations, yes, the Hail Marys. Continual sacrifice and penance, yes, Christ even wrote about that in his letters to the church. Worship of the Queen of Heaven, yes, they do. Mary is now the Queen of Heaven, and of course they worship back in the days of Babylon the Queen of Heaven. Worship of idols and statues, yes, all the churches today have statues and idols within them. The doctrine of purgatory was taught by ancient Babylonian cult, yes. Roman Catholicism has picked up the doctrine of purgatory. All of these things come from the ancient Nimrod, Mother Madonna cult, and of course the Jesuits infiltrated with their mystery esoteric part of it. In the dress, the pontifex wore a fish head, a hat, and the Pope wears one, They had a long robe shaped as a fish body, and the Pope wears one. He had a ring shaped like a fish, and the Pope has one. He carried a crozier, and the Pope has one. And the pontiff was carried on a chair. And we have videos of the Pope being carried on a chair, so it's the same. The priestly forgiveness of sins, yes. That was done back then, and it's done today at confessional. Sprinkling of holy water. Yes, anybody that's been to a Roman Catholic service sees the priests up there sprinkling their holy water. And the sign of the cross, the T, was photemos. And yes, the Christians make the sign of the cross. Most Roman Catholics do not understand or realize what it is they are actually involved with. It's the same as Masonry today. 310, prayers for the dead were introduced. 310, the sign of the cross. 375, the veneration of angels and dead saints. 394, Mass as a daily celebration was introduced. 431, the worship of Mary begins. 593, the doctrine of purgatory. 610, title of Pope begins. 709, the kissing of the Pope's foot begins, which is what they did back in ancient Babylon. 788, worship of the cross, images and relics. 850, use of holy water begins. 995, canonization of dead saints begins. 998, fasting on Fridays and Lent. 1079, the celibacy of the priesthood begins. 1090, the rosary prayer rituals begin. 1190, the sale of indulgences, sin for sale. So what they did in ancient Babylon. 1215, confessionals begin. 1220, the adoration of the wafer or the round cakes begins. 1439, the doctrine of purgatory was affirmed. 1545, tradition was granted equal authority to the Bible. These are all things that the Roman Catholic Church introduced. 1546, the apocryphal books were put into the Catholic Bible. 1854, the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception of Mary was introduced. 1870, the infallibility of the Pope was proclaimed. 1930, all public schools were condemned by the Pope. 1959, the Assumption of Mary into heaven was proclaimed. 1955, Mary was proclaimed Mother of the Church. 1979, papal infallibility were reconfirmed. And in 1988, Mary was called the Queen of Heaven and Queen of the Universe. So slowly, Satan has introduced the ancient cult of Madonna Child into the Catholic Church. Little children, it is the last time, and as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now there are many Antichrists, whereby we know it is the last time. These are the Gnostics that John is speaking of here, and every spirit that confesses not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God, and this is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye had heard that it should come, even now already is it in the world. When they say Jesus Christ come in the flesh, they're talking about the redeeming aspects of Jesus Christ and the kinsman-redeemer law. They are of the world, says John, therefore speak they of the world, and the world hears them. You'll find that the occult speaks about a world order, a world system of religion, a world economic system. Everything they speak of is about the world and setting up a golden utopia upon the world, whereas Jesus didn't speak of the world. He spoke of his kingdom, which was not of this world. For the mystery of iniquity does already work, said Paul, only he who now letteth will let, until he be taken out of the way. And what he's talking about here is the Holy Spirit is acting as a restrainer to the mystery of iniquity, of the secret hidden things. And when he is taken out of the way, when the Holy Spirit finally relinquishes control, then it will come forth. Occult theocracy, let us add that the ancient mysteries of Gnosticism have been known and published in the past. There is no difference between Gnosticism of the early ages of Christianity and modern occultism. She's speaking really here about Freemasonry in all of its various forms. The fundamental principle of Gnosticism was the double divinity or dual principle And this is exactly the theory of modern occultism. The Gnostics claimed that the good God was Lucifer and that Christ was the devil, and what the Christians call vice was for them virtue. Luciferian occultism, as has been said before, is therefore not a novelty, but it bore a different name in the early days of Christianity. It was called Gnosticism, and its founder was Simon the magician. The Gnostics were not ordinary heretics, but constituted an anti-Christian sect. To deceive the multitudes, they affected disagreement with certain doctrines of the apostles, and the chiefs selected from among the initiates those destined to receive in secret council the satanic revelation. Gnosticism is marked with the seal of Lucifer, and what they do is they simply take the scriptures and reverse it. The Kabbalah is occult science itself. It is the secret theology of the initiates. Theology essentially satanic. In a word, counter-theology, a reverse theology. Our God, the God of the Christians, is the power of evil in the eyes of the Kabbalists, and they, for them, the power of good, the real God, is Lucifer. The Kabbalah teaches magic, or the art of intercourse with spirits and supernatural beings. This is the same thing they were teaching man in the antediluvian age.
The first part of our puzzle took us to pre-First World War Vienna, where all sorts of esoteric, occult, and Sumerian ideas and material were circulating. Ideas which would later be taken up by the Third Reich, and with them the vision of a new and unconventional technology. It was a period which witnessed an enormous blossoming of various secret doctrines and orders: Templars and Rosicrucians, Illuminati and Freemasons, Anthroposophists, Theosophists, Neo-Templars and Armanen. Some of them seemed suddenly to have woken up after a centuries-long sleep. What had disturbed their slumber was this: the impending arrival of the prophesied New Age, the changeover from the age of Pisces to the Aquarian Age. Every one of these groups felt themselves called upon to make their mark on the approaching era. At the beginning, heretical theologians as well as Oriental, Nordic, and Atlantis scholars all worked in concert, fascinated by one goal: the new golden age. At the end of time, the twilight of the gods, he will realize that heaven and hell are our own thoughts and actions, good and evil our own invention. Then he can draw on this experience to make the journey home to completeness. The powers of darkness and light serve only one Lord, the creator of all things. They have the one goal of availing ourselves of the life experience to create a race of superior beings. Power without love can only lead to catastrophe. Adolf Hitler. He read all the books and other literature he could find on these subjects. Hitler soon evolved a vision whereby he realized the world would have to be reforged to pave the way for a new age. The way was now marked out for the steps he would take. The black sun symbol can be found in many Babylonian and Assyrian places of worship. Even the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians knew of the symbol and the beliefs that it represented. The Babylonian and Assyrian civilizations often depicted the black sun, the Godhead's inner light, in the form of a cross. Assyrian kings wore an insignia which in no way differed from the one more commonly known as the German Knight's Cross. This means the origin of this cross is many thousands of years older than Christianity. We have, inspired by members of the Thule Society, Hitler's plan for a 1,000-year Reich was born. Maria Ortiz presented texts she had received from her spirit medium, one in the Sumerian alphabet and the other in the secret code of the Knights Templar. Both texts had already been translated. Were they messages from the gods, or tidings from some alien civilization? Construction plans for the development of some new advanced technology which would enable mankind to reach for the stars? Esoteric knowledge played an ever-increasing role in the search for new sources of energy and motive power. Such research as there was particularly important in the development of electrogravitational and tachometric propulsion. This seemed to be at the very core of the alternative technology. The energy source of the future, cheap, clean, and independent of raw materials. Two special departments, U-13 and SSE-4, were set up to concentrate exclusively on the realization of this new technology. Before the end of 1934, the Friel Society had built its first light aircraft, the RFC-2 round aircraft. It was fitted with an improved Friel propulsion system and, for the first time, magnetic impulse steering.
Right after World War II, President Truman issued an executive order under a program called Operation Paperclip. Under Operation Paperclip, German Nazis were imported into the United States. The technology was brought here, and we have no reason to suspect that the UFO technology developed by the Nazis during the war and prior to it was brought here as well, and most likely they followed the same pattern of underground bases as Germany had and took the materials over to the Area 51 complex and have been in the process, undoubtedly, of experimentation on alternative energy for the last 50 years. This is very interesting to note because it was soon after World War II, it was in 1947, for example, that a UFO crashed out in Roswell, New Mexico. Now, it is very possible that the Germans were in contact with these so-called aliens. Our investigation into the UFOs would say they are not aliens, but demons. And that transfer of technology over to America would then follow the biblical pattern of prophecy in that Satan gives his power unto the United States of America, and she becomes the leading Babylonian power of the end times. So it is no small wonder that as soon as that technology was transferred, the Americans began to see strange sights in the skies and were witnessing many UFO activities. What really happened with the transfer of high technology and alternative energy systems to the United States was that British Freemasonry finally had control over these things. British Freemasonry had long ago infiltrated and taken over the highest levels of the United States government. And Masonry, as we are going to now find out, is in fact under the guardianship of Satan and under the guardianship of Lucifer. They are the ancient Gnostics. In fact, if one really studies in depth Freemasonry and the highest levels of degrees, one finds that the G that is often found in Freemasonry symbols does not refer to God whatsoever. It refers to Gnosticism and the god of this world, Lucifer. We are now going to examine the Freemasonry infiltration into the United States and their ultimate takeover of the German technologies, which leads us directly to the formation of the final end-time beast power of Babylon the Great. So the six-pointed star of David, so-called, the symbols of the Masons. These are all secret symbols with hidden meanings. And they all go back to Atlantis, the antediluvian age. They go back to the days of before Noah. And in the book Bridge to Light, they admit with how this thing works. The apex of our teachings has been the rituals of degrees of morals and dogma written by our beloved sovereign Grand Commander, Albert Pike. Albert Pike was an occultist, supreme occultist, digging deep into the mysteries. I want you to look closely at the symbol on top of the head, the hat here. And that's worn by 33rd degree Mason. It's a symbol of Baphomet. And you'll notice that it was just done in gold. You'll find this is a letter from the Sovereign Grand Commander, Supreme Council, Scottish Rites, Washington, D.C., to all the, and you will notice the symbol of Baphomet, and he does it in writing next to his name. But what does that mean? What does that symbol actually mean when it comes right down to it? This was a letter because Lyndon LaRouche and his people were causing problems, wanting people to get rid of the statue of Albert Pike. Baphomet is a universal symbol of Satan, and Albert Pike defines it in his book Morals and Dogma. The goat of Mendez. The goat head of Mendez is depicted in the upside-down Eastern Star. It's the universal symbol of Satan. These people are satanic worshipers. They worship, actually, Lucifer. And in their temple, you'll find the serpent scattered around everywhere, on their carvings, on their big temples. Satan is the serpent. But you'll find something else. You will also find the swastika. You'll find it on the temples, but more importantly, you will also find it all over the buildings in Washington, D.C. It's engraved on the tops, and you will notice that they form a symbol. If you watch the engravings carefully, they form the swastika. You have to remember that the hidden secret societies, the roads of Washington are laid out. There's your symbol of Baphomet, the upside-down star. The White House is built on lot number 666. Everything laid out in Washington, there's the skull, was laid out by a Mason. There's your skull, and there's the little horn of Bible prophecy up on top of the head. A Luciferian worshiper from France designed Washington, D.C. There are many, many hidden things in the layouts of the streets, the parks, and how everything is designed in Washington, all the hidden secret societies. There it is. There's an actual map right out of a highway map, and you can see it clear as a bell. You can see the city foursquare of Washington, D.C. within the skull head. the book, The Secret Destiny of America by Manly Hall, he states the monogram of the new Atlantis, he's speaking about the Great Seal of the United States, reveals this continent is set apart for the accomplishment of the great work. Here to arise the pyramid of human aspiration, the school of the secret sciences. Over this nation rules the supreme king, the ever-living God, and of course that's Lucifer. This nation is dedicated to the fulfillment of the divine will, and they're talking about the divine will of Lucifer. Unfortunately, they don't realize who's really in charge. Franklin spoke for the Order of the Quest. That's the root of the whole thing, the Freemasons. And most of the men who worked with him in the early days of the American Revolution were members. The plan was working out. The new Atlantis was coming into being in accordance with the program laid down by Francis Bacon 150 years earlier. The rise of American democracy was necessary to a world program. At the appointed hour, the freedom of man was publicly declared. The order of the quest. Now, the end of the quest is, in America shall be erected a shrine to universal truth, as here arises the global democratic commonwealth, and that's the United Nations. That's why it's on U.S. soil. The true wealth of all the nations of mankind, which is designed in a foundation that men shall abide together in peace and shall devote their energies to the common cause of discovery. The power of man lies in his dreams, his visions, his ideals. This has been the common vision of man's necessity in the secret empire of the Brotherhood of the Quest, consecrated to fulfilling the destiny for which we are in America were brought to be.